Today I want to share some thoughts with you on what I'm calling over the shoulder. And I got that from a comment that I heard on TV about how some chefs don't have a degree in culinary arts, but they learned what they learned by looking over the shoulder of their mentors. In the Bible, in Exodus chapter 18, in verse number 24, it says that Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he said. And I think sometimes you and I forget that the best of the best always have mentors. They always have teachers and are never ashamed of going back to those teachers to seek more information. Justin Locke shares a story. When I was 15 years old, I went through an extraordinary life-altering event. For years, I had attended a rather grim public school that served that relatively poor rural community. But then one day I was taken out of that environment and transferred, or perhaps one should say transported, into this wondrous environment, the local rich kid population prep school. For decades, I have been planning to write a book about the cultural differences and compare the cultures of poor kids and rich kids. And I've finally done it. It's called Getting in Touch with Your Inner Rich Kid. Why am I telling you this, he says? Because one of the big differences between poor kids and rich kids, listen, was the presence of mentoring, In the poor kids' school, there was one single guidance counselor to serve over 2,000 students. I had exactly one meeting with this person, and all I can remember of that meeting was her saying, "Justin, you can't go into music. You'll never make a living at it." But she really meant well, you see. And after all, what possible hope, I should say, did a kid in that school ever have playing in the Boston Pops? Well, but when I arrived at the rich kids' school, there was no guidance counselor. Instead, I was astonished to hear that, like all the other rich kids, was to be, paired up with a specific person on staff who would act as my advisor. So instead of having one counselor, they were peered and paired with other people. This was way more than just who could give me terse advice during the course of the year. They were a pal. They were a mentor. They were your support system. If you had any kind of issue, you had someone in power that could talk one-on-one with you. It was actually even better than advice. It was just a sense of support, of safety and connection, he writes. I stayed in touch through my senior year advisor, and many years after I graduated, I saw, he said, this support structure in other rich kid environments. In my 20s, I had spent really several years as a college drop-in at Harvard University, as my best friend was a live-in tutor at Radcliffe. What is a tutor, you ask? Well, for all the academic stardom of your average Harvard student, there was an embedded support structure of tutors for them in Harvard. These tutors were recent grads, and they provided this big brother approach in their support for the students. He says, when I was a poor kid, I was a lone individual dealing with government bureaucracy. When I became a rich kid, you see, I was provided with adults in my life that I could lean on for support, for encouragement, for wisdom. He says this, wealth is derived in no small part, from your emotional infrastructure. Again, wealth is derived in no small part from your emotional infrastructure. So the importance of all of us having mentors in our lives cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. In Exodus chapter 2 in the Bible, I'm not going to get into, it's a very long story. I'm not going to get into that too much, but Moses was adopted by the king of Egypt called a Pharaoh. And his heritage were people that were slaves to the Egyptians. Well, one day in Exodus chapter 2, Moses saw one of his people being hurt, being beat. So he killed the Egyptian that was beating one of his fellow men. Even though he was adopted by this Pharaoh, he had everything he possibly wanted, but he realized that he had enough of his people being abused. So he ran from Egypt. So he ended up in this place. It's, again, a longer story. But he was able to be mentored by a man who was fairly wealthy, and he had influence in the area, and he had lots of sheep and goats, and he put Moses in charge of his animals. And he eventually connected Moses with one of his daughters. They got married, they had kids. But Moses never stopped seeking the advice and the counsel of then he became his father-in-law, because he knew that his father-in-law had information that he didn't have. And I wonder how many of us, or maybe people you know, that think once they reach a certain status in life, or even a certain age, whether you're 16 or 18 or 21 or 51, that you think you know everything and you don't need any more information, when in fact the older people, even those in their 80s, still that they know that they don't know. So we see over and over again in the book of Exodus that Moses leaned on the counsel of people that were much smarter than him. In fact, there came a point where Moses was challenged to free his people from slavery in Egypt. And he was like, I am the least qualified person around. So in time, he was able to talk Aaron, a relative of his, to help him on his journey. And I think sometimes you and I forget oftentimes that we don't have to have all the answers to achieve great things. Sometimes we have to, I say sometimes, we should all the time surround ourselves with people who can coach us in areas that maybe we can't see, or maybe that we don't think that we can accomplish certain things. But if we put the right people in the right places in our lives, we can see that it can radically change our lives. So again, Moses placed himself under the authority of this father-in-law that encouraged him to learn what he could learn in a very dramatic way. That, in fact, those skills were transferable over to years later, 40 plus years after the fact, leading hundreds of thousands, or some say millions of people from Egypt into their own land. But that wouldn't have happened if Moses hadn't placed himself under the authority of this father-in-law, and some people would call him Jethro. That was his name. Michael Kelly wrote, in the outside, God was busy preparing Moses to know what life was like in the desert, he said, which would come in pretty handy when he spent the next 40 years of life wandering around there. The stuff he learned about finding water and sleeping arrangements and wildlife and plant life, you name it, would be invaluable. Moses had no clue he was learning all this, but he was. But on the inside, Michael Kelly writes, God was also busy. He was busy helping Moses become the sort of person could walk into the court of the most powerful man in town and say, let my people go. And the story is that he came to Pharaoh multiple times and said, let my people go. Let my people be freed from this bondage that they've been in for such a long time. He was preparing Moses to be the kind of person that could deal with the impatience and belly aching of a liberalized people. The backstory behind that is there came a time when Moses did lead these people out of bondage and out of slavery, that the people that he let out started whining and complaining about they had food back in Egypt, even though they were in slavery. They started whining and complaining about it. So we see over time how Moses had to learn how to deal with people, even though he was surrounded with crybabies and whiners. And I would have to tell you that maybe I'd be the same way. Maybe you would be the same way if you were in that situation way back then. I think oftentimes you and I forget to look at the teachers and the instructors that are all around us. And sometimes, not all the time, I'd say a percentage of the time, some of those teachers may be younger than you. There was a time in my life, in my 20s, that I thought that anybody younger than me couldn't teach me anything. How wrong is that? I would suggest to you that even children can teach you things. Even seniors can definitely teach you things because they've been around the barn a few hundred times. Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, was a model for him, who then Moses became a model for hundreds of thousands of other people. So who you place yourself in front of can not only impact you, but can also impact lots of other people that maybe you haven't even met yet. Laura Entis wrote, Richard Branson isn't afraid of coming across as a little eccentric. And while he considers his parents the most important mentors in his life, he credits his oddball Uncle Jim for teaching him a little thing or two and really to think outside the box. It was Uncle Jim's habit of eating grass, yes, you heard me right, eating grass, that was wildly mocked in the Army until it earned him a role in advising the elite forces how to live off grass and nuts when food was scarce. Branson writes, there have been countless occasions in my business career when everyone has urged me to make one decision and I have gone in the opposite direction, from setting up Virgin Atlantic to fighting to get Virgin Trains West Coast back on track. Not every move worked, but that's the part of fun and the best way I can learn. He ends with Uncle Jim's example was simply that it's sometimes okay to take the path less traveled. It's a lesson I'm still following today. You see, if Moses hadn't placed himself under the direction and guidance of Jethro, who had been there and done that, Moses may not have become the man that he did. If you and I think that we have all the answers and we don't place ourselves in the lives of people who are ethical, who are honest, who have integrity, and who will mentor us, whether it's in a book form or face-to-face, we're missing out on so many opportunities that can literally change our lives and the lives of people all around us. Shark Tank Robert Herjavec, most memorable moment with a mentor was completely unplanned. He was having a conversation with his then boss, Werner Avis, the founder of Avis Rent-A-Car, and Avis led Herjavec to an office window and pointing to a hot dog vendor down below. He told me that I was acting like the vendor, pushing product and doing all the work and making a living, but Herjavec writes, the following that really stayed with him, those mindset, those words of wisdom stuck with him tremendously. He says, you need to be the guy supplying the dogs to all the vendors if you ever want to scale. Again, he provided wisdom and knowledge for this guy to reframe what he was doing and more importantly, how he was thinking. So you have to start having conversations with people who have paid the dues long before we even thought about paying the dues. Sometimes mentors, as Don Meyer writes, that you have to find mentors that will give you insights that you didn't even think about. Maybe opportunities or plans or maybe just seeds of thoughts that you never even thought about. They can also help you see blind spots. Ooh, have you ever placed yourself under the mentorship of people that you didn't see certain things in your life, but they mentioned it and it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I even had that issue? How about areas of discipline that maybe you could build upon? Maybe areas maybe strengths that you didn't think you had, but other people saw you had those strengths, and then they encourage you to build upon those strengths, and that literally changed the way you looked at life. Over in the Old Testament, in the book of Proverbs, it says, he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Listen, reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Verse 9, give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. Again, I've said this hundreds of times to lots of people, but you have to stay away from people who don't know that they don't know. Again, stay away from people who don't know that they don't know. You should hang around people who know that they know, not just from arrogance, but just from experience. Another text says, the instruction of the wise, this is in Proverbs 13, the instruction of the wise is like a life-giving fountain, but those who accept it avoid the snares of death. When Moses have become great without Jethro? I would probably say no. Proverbs goes on to say, walk with the wise and become wise, and associate with fools and get in trouble. Let me say it again. Walk with the wise and become wise, and associate with fools and get in trouble. How many people do you know who hang around people who don't know that they don't know? I cannot say this enough times. Once you know people in your life that they don't know, you really need to really back away from the relationship if you're following them in any way, because they're not going to get you anywhere. Hang around people that know where they're going, that they're leveraging their mistakes, and more importantly, the mistakes of other people. Again, would Moses have become a great leader if it wasn't for Jethro? I would think not. John Wooden was a great basketball coach, and he wrote, we are all called to give back. Since there is nothing we can take with us for this life, we should try to leave behind as much as possible. It's a basic and well-known truth. Those of us who have been blessed with worldly success have an even greater responsibility that make an impact with our time or our talents and our resources. As we are reminded in the Gospels, from him to whom much is given, much is required. So I'm asking you today to maybe leverage the information that you've been taught and will learn for the benefit of people that you may not even meet. You and I have to place ourselves in situations, or at least leverage current situations, where you purposely learn from wise people around you or from their books. I have about, 325 books in my house that I've acquired over the years. And it could be just a phrase, it could be a paragraph or an entire book that radically changed the way I looked at things in life, because I chose to put myself in front of this material that caused my brain to my life, my lifestyle, my thought process to be changed in a very positive way. So you have to acknowledge that you know that you don't know if you want to get anywhere in life, and surround yourself with coaches that are all around you that are investing in you. Again, whether it's in book form or person to person. I'm asking you right now to think about the times in your life when you've ignored advice from people in your own life. There's a story over in 1 Kings in the Old Testament where there's a guy named Elijah who was a prophet, and he was winding down his career path. Let me just put it that way. And there was a time when he had to go find a substitute or a replacement for him. And this guy's name was Elisha. Elijah and Elisha. Well, there came a time during those two partnering that Elijah gave Elisha the opportunity to just, stay behind. You don't have to follow me so close. You don't have to learn from me so much. But Elisha's like, no way. I'm going to stay with you to the very end. This is where it really gets difficult. Because when you get tired of the journey, when you get weak, and when you get discouraged, when you get frustrated with what's going on in your life, sometimes it's tempting to turn off that learning button, or it's tempting to stop trying to master the skill sets that you need to lengthen your exposure to other people, to lengthen your influence in the world, because you're going through some very, very difficult times. So in Elijah and Elisha's case, there came a period of time where the student mentored the teacher. And there's an old, I think John Maxwell said that it's called leading up. When you and I have an opportunity to lead up, we have an opportunity to not only influence our leader or our teacher, who then influences more people as well. There are times when you'll be recognized and honored by the reputation of the people that you keep. And I have to say it a different way. There's going to be times when you're going to get in trouble because of the people that you surround yourself with. Maybe you're not the one causing the issues, but you are getting in trouble as a result of the people you surround yourself with, because you're looking over the shoulder of other people. You're hanging around other people that don't have a clue where they're going, versus you are then, if on the flip side, you're going to get blessed, you're going to be able to grow, you're going to be able to blossom because you choose to hang around with the right kind of people. John Maxwell talked about this. He talked about it, how you lead yourself. He said that leaders lead themselves really, really well. They lead themselves really, really well, and they also lighten their leader's load. It's called giving back. It's called, again, leading up. He says that you should be willing to do what others don't do. That is, paying the price, as somebody else said, and a little bit more. Paying the price and a little bit more. He says, invest in relationship chemistry. He says, people won't go along with you if they can't get along with you. So you and I have to create an environment in our lives, if we're going to get anywhere in life, that we have to literally, I'm not even saying figuratively, you have to literally place yourself in the paths of people that will help you grow in an ethical and in a moral way, that will then in time enable you to influence people in your life that you would not have been able to influence if you would not have placed your life in the path of people that can mentor you. Again, this could be in book form or in face-to-face. So you have to be better than you are today by the people that you choose to hang around. So as I close, in summary, it's up to you and I to find people where you can look over their shoulder and learn as much as you can, as much as possible. Then let others look over your shoulder so they can pass it on. Thanks for watching. My name's John Carver.